Just a quick heads up before we launch into the news. I need to announce that we are quitting Twitter. I've been thinking about this for a long time now, as I've generally soured on social media as a whole over the last few years. But the straw for me was a story that I read this morning in the Washington Post about Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey telling Michigan State Representative Ilhan Omar that President Trump's tweets about her, in which he lied about comments she made about the 9/11 attacks, were perfectly in line with Twitter's policies on harassment, even though Representative Omar has received a flood of death threats in the wake of Trump's toxic tweet. Frankly, Twitter is a shit company and a shit platform, and I don't want to be associated with it anymore. If you're on Twitter, you should quit. Facebook too, and Instagram and WhatsApp, and all the other social media sites that are a cancer on the world. Just quit social media. This episode of Marijuana Today is brought to you by MJ Today Media, publishers of this podcast, our weekly show Marijuana Today, and the excellent Green Rush podcast, which interviews interesting people doing interesting things in legal marijuana. Check us out over at mjtodaymedia.com and greenrushpodcast.net. Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Friday, April 26th, 2019, and you're tuned in to episode 713 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. We start the day off in Michigan, where yesterday the state's medical marijuana licensing board met for the last time as control over medical cannabis transfers to a new authority, the Marijuana Regulatory Agency, which was created by Governor Gretchen Whitmer and that will officially come to life on May 1st. The board that met for the last time last night has been criticized throughout its tenure for the slowness with which it processed and issued marijuana business licenses. So there aren't many tears being shed today among Michigan industry insiders or patients. Michigan has one of the largest pools of registered medical cannabis patients in the country, a long-established medical marijuana community, and is transitioning to allowing adult use sales, so it remains one of the most interesting states in the industry. If you're not paying attention to Michigan news, you really should be. Dan Adams over at the Boston Globe covered another meeting held by a state cannabis authority as the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission met yesterday and discussed and decided upon a number of matters. Dan's story examines a storyline we've been following and one that he's been instrumental in breaking, looking at multi-state cannabis operators working to control more than the 3 maximum business licenses allowed by any one entity. During yesterday's Cannabis Control Commission meeting, commission members said that they would more closely examine marijuana businesses and the ties they have with other companies. In addition, new penalties are being considered for people or corporations who are found to be breaking the rules, including a 5-year ban from participating in Massachusetts industry. The commission also will be requiring companies applying for cannabis business licenses to disclose any management contracts they may have with other companies. Our final top story for the day and the week is a spin off the storyline of headline number 2, as last night the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission rejected for the first time a marijuana business license applicant. The folks behind Pittsfield-based Mass Yield Cultivation were taken to task by committee members for apparently not actually reading the requirements for cannabis business license applications, which stipulates that applicants have a plan for increasing diversity and making a positive impact on their community. Mass Yield Cultivation's plans were apparently vague, only talking about creating scholarships and donating to police departments. Mass Yield will be given the chance to rewrite their application for future reconsideration. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out in headlines, let's quickly thank our sponsor, MJ Today Media, makers of this podcast, our weekly show Marijuana Today, and the excellent Green Rush podcast, which interviews interesting people doing interesting things in legal marijuana. Hit me up on email if you need help producing your own podcast or if you want to learn how to sponsor our shows. We have the biggest and best audience in legal marijuana podcasting, and if you give us money, we'll talk about your business. Pretty straight up proposition. You can reach me via email at shay@mjtodaymedia.com. That's shay@mjtodaymedia.com, with Shay spelled S-H-E-A. All right, time for the Blitz. Yesterday, Vermont Governor Phil Scott reiterated his opposition to any legal adult use sales legislation that does not include provisions allowing police to administer roadside tests of the saliva of drivers suspected to be operating under the influence of cannabis. This is a well-covered storyline here on The Daily, and yesterday Scott told reporters that he needed to see three things in any legal adult use sales bill he'd consider signing: the marijuana testing provision, one allowing Vermont towns to opt out of legal sales, and increased funding for an educational campaign to dissuade young people from marijuana. Former Democratic Vice President Joe Biden just announced that he is running in the 2020 presidential race, and Rolling Stone has nicely pulled together a story looking at Biden's prohibitionist past. Biden has a downright dismal record on progressive cannabis reform, besides being a misogynist dinosaur who should just retire, so his long-held opposition to legalization places him deeply at odds with his fellow Democratic candidates. Zip over to E.J. Dixon's story in Rolling Stone for all the details here. Matt Lamers over Marijuana Business Daily has a good pickup of comments made by Cam Batley, COO of Canadian marijuana giant Aurora Cannabis, on the focus cannabis companies in his country have on American firms. As we saw with the blockbuster deal announced between Canopy Growth and Acreage Holdings, which will give Canopy the rights to buy acreage when marijuana becomes federally legal in the U.S., there's a lot of interest focused down here from up there. Batley spoke with financial analyst Owen Bennett of the Jefferies Group and said, quote, "Having a major presence in the U.S. is non-negotiable for any cannabis company that intends to call itself a global leader," unquote. A DEA agent in Nebraska was just quoted in the news saying something that I think distills the futility of his job. Special Agent Richard Salter Jr. with the Omaha division of the DEA said, quote, "Growing up, you could pick out a drug dealer by looking at them, the way they act, dress, and on the street corner. Now it could be your grandmother, it's doctors, it's lawyers, it's professionals, school teachers like we see in the news. It's anybody," unquote. A bit of subtle racism there, but he's not entirely wrong in that with legal cannabis comes more involvement by people from other walks of life. It's harder to arrest everyone. The New Hampshire State Senate will soon consider a bill allowing medical marijuana patients to grow their own cannabis after the Senate Health and Human Services Committee just voted 3-2 in favor of House Bill 364, which was approved by the House already last month. If approved and signed into law, the bill would allow patients and caregivers to grow up to 3 mature plants, 3 immature plants, and maintain 12 seedlings. Marijuana company Vero Health just announced that it had security patents on marijuana-infused tobacco products, or as Ben Adlin over at Leafly put it, blunts. This is a bit of an odd story, as Vero is claiming that its new cannabis-infused tobacco will somehow help people stop smoking tobacco. I think Ben's skeptical take on this one feels right. I'd open this one up to read in full if I were you. As always, we have all the news we cover linked to on our website at mjtodaydaily.com. And finally for today, the Washington Post takes a much-needed look at how the disparities between marijuana's federal illegal status and its new legality in places like Washington, D.C. are affecting medical marijuana patients and users living in public housing, which, because of federal funding, tends to take a harsh stance on the use of cannabis by residents. Marijuana use is banned from federally funded public housing, which is to say just about all of it, and those who are caught with cannabis can be kicked out of their homes, as I've sadly had to report a number of times here on the show. The disparities are perhaps even more striking than usual in D.C. because of how weird the overlap is between federal property, where marijuana use can get you arrested, and D.C. city space, where it will not. Read this story and share this story. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again Monday morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. Thanks to our sponsor, MJ Today Media, and to all of our awesome Patreon listeners for the support that makes this show possible. To join the illustrious ranks of the Patreon listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.